It's cold out today, and Rocky and I have already had our breakfast. It's like I say, it's cold out today, so I'm kind of under the covers here to stay warm. There's, I don't know if you can see him or not. Can you see Rocky? Rocky's asleep there at the foot of the bed. He's actually on top of my feet. He is. Yeah. I don't know if you saw him or not, though, because I had to turn the phone around. I can't really see what's visible when I do that. I need a shave. I'll probably shave later today because I do need to shave. But anyway, I say anyway a lot. I'm trying not to, but I do still sometimes. I'm going to tell you all a story about a trip that we took when I was a kid down to the Lake Placid, New York area. Now, this is kind of funny, actually. I had a cousin. I didn't have any brothers that lived. I only had the one brother who only lived a day and died, and that was before I was born. He would have been a half-brother had he lived. I guess he was a half-brother, or is a half-brother, but anyway, he was, like I say, I never knew him. So I had this cousin who was a few months younger than me. I was born in July of 68. He was born in October of 68. And he came up kind of rough, He didn't have a very good life, really very good upbringing, and so on. And my dad used to take him under his wing quite a bit, and try and teach him things and try to include him in things that our family did, and so on. And anyway, one year it was decided that we would take my cousin Allan with us on our family vacation. My dad was a tool and die maker in a shoe factory in my hometown, and an industrial mechanic. Very talented man. There wasn't a whole lot he couldn't build or fix, And he'd get his 2 weeks off in the summertime for vacation. And so we used to go down to Lake Placid. We'd get a housekeeping cabin at like Upper J, New York, in that area, which was near Lake Placid. And we go to all the tourist traps, Santa's Village, the Land of Make-Believe. I remember we went to Frontier Town one year, and it was still under construction. It was only partially finished. And I remember doing a rain dance with the natives there. They had these native Indians, and they were all dressed up in the traditional, with the headdresses and all that, and all the skins and all that that they would have worn 100 years before that. And we did a rain dance, and it actually did start raining, but I don't know if that was a coincidence or if we caused that, or maybe they even had some sort of a sprinkler system where they were able to make us think it was raining. I really don't know. But I know the water did come down from the sky anyway, so I don't know. Anyway, we might have made it start raining. But Frontier Town was still under construction at that time. The Land of Make-Believe was my favorite place. I really loved Art Monaco's Land of Make-Believe, which was in Lower J, New York, which was down the mountain from Upper J, where we had our housekeeping cabin we used to rent every year. So we decided to take my cousin Allan with us. Of course, Allan was a bit of a savage. Allan pretty much lived on the streets, and, he had a home, but, he was pretty much left to his own devices, and he was a bit of a savage anyway. We decided to take him with us. He's a bit of a Dennis the Menace, but with an edge. Allan was, I guess that's the best way to describe him. And we brought him with us. And of course, he'd never been anywhere, really, we hadn't been many places, but he really hadn't been anywhere, He'd been in our home in Perth and Smiths Falls, and that was about it, really. So to him, this was a big deal, and we took him to the Land of Make-Believe and to the Santa's Village and all these different places. And I've still got photographs that were taken of that time. And, it was kind of nice to be able to do that. But, of course, Allan, he had that way about him. and you never knew what he might do. And anyway, it ended up, the final straw came. We were in this housekeeping cabin, and the way it was, there were several housekeeping cabins in a row. So we had neighbors, we had people beside us. We were at the one on the end, but we had people beside us, and then there were more down the row, And anyway, the people beside us, and this wasn't unusual. This was 1970s time, This was around 1974. And a lot of people still had 1950s cars in 1974. Our next door neighbor had a 1955 Plymouth. It was a big black four-door sedan, and it was a 1955 Plymouth, which was just their family car, that they came on vacation in. I remember it had Pennsylvania license plates on it, so they were from Pennsylvania, these people. Anyway, the old cars had what we called wing windows, or vent windows, which was a little triangular window. And I mean, for people who are very young, they won't know what this is. People my age, or even younger than me, a lot of people will know. It was a little triangular window that would open up. It was part of the front door window, basically. And it was like behind the windshield and ahead of the main window on the doors, And you could open that up, and it would allow some air to flow through. And if people were smoking cigarettes, it would allow the smoke to go out, and so on. Anyway, back then a lot of cars still had those. Even some new cars still had them in that era. And old cars like that, they all had those. Cars from the 40s and 50s and early 60s, they pretty well all had wing windows, And my cousin, he got the idea. See, there was a vegetable garden in back of our cabin that belonged to the lady that owned the cabins. And she had her hose all coiled up in like a big metal roller kind of a thing on wheels. And it was connected to the back of our cabin. It was hooked up to the water tap at the back of our cabin. She used that to water her garden. And she could just drag the hose out there, back to the garden. It was a long hose. My cousin, Allan, he got an idea. And that was never good when Allan would get an idea. But he told me, he said, just watch this. And he went back around. I followed him. And he went back around. At the time, I was 6 and he was nearly 6. We go back around behind the cabin. And he starts pulling this hose out. This old black hose with the brass end on it, and stuff. And he's pulling it out, unwinding it. See, it's all uncoiling from the big metal wheel. He's all pulling it out there. He drags it around the corner, and he's walking towards the neighbor's car, which was parked on that side of our cabin, between the two cabins. And I kind of had an idea he was up to no good, and I told him, I said, whatever you're thinking of doing, you better not, You're going to get us both in a lot of trouble. Oh, never mind that. He says, just watch this. And he took the hose, and he pushed the vent window open. He just kind of put his hand on it and pushed, and it opened up. And he shoved the hose in through the vent window of this car, this 55 Plymouth. And then he went back and he turned the tap on. And of course, the water started coming out the hose into the car. Well, at that point, I freaked out. I thought, oh, this isn't good. Back then, that sort of thing would get you severely beat. And I was thinking, I'm going to take a beating just for being here and knowing about it. Like, this isn't good. And I'm saying to him, don't do that. Like, what are you doing? You're going to get us both in a ton of trouble. Like, you're going to wreck that car, and you're going to get us both into a lot of trouble. Well, I tried to actually pull the hose out of the car, and he got a hold of him. He was stronger than I was, he was a tough little guy, and he managed to wrestle me to the ground anyway and prevent me from doing that. And anyway, quite a bit of water went into the car, and my dad, I think he must have heard the arguing between us, because he come around the corner, And all I heard out of him was, oh, and then, well, you can imagine. It was a bad word anyway. Starts with F, 4 letters. And he run over and he pulled the hose out of the car and turned the water off. He wasn't happy anyway. But I think he kind of heard our argument and he knew that I was trying to put a stop to it. So I didn't get into any trouble. But he definitely, he slapped my cousin around a bit anyway. Give Allan a few good clouts. And of course then he had to go and see the man who owned the car, tell him what happened. And my dad ended up having to pay that guy some money to compensate him for whatever, I guess for his soaked upholstery and for his inconvenience and everything else to have to dry his car out. And the landlady, she came to see us, and she said, you guys come here every year, and there's never been a problem before, but she said, you got to take that little guy back. He can't be here anymore. She said, you take him home, and then if you want to come up and finish your vacation, that'll be fine, but he can't be here anymore. So, anyway, the next day, we had to drive my cousin Allan back to Perth, and we left him with our grandparents, and then we went back to Lake Placid to finish our vacation. But, yeah, just one of those stories I remember from when I was a kid, and I laugh about it now. It wasn't very funny at the time, so I laugh about it now, though. My cousin Allan died a few years ago. He was only in his mid-40s when he passed away, so I guess rest in peace is what I should say. And, looking back on it now, even with all the crazy things that happened, most of which he initiated, yeah, I love my cousin Allan anyway, like I say, yeah, he didn't have much of a chance in life, and he wasn't a truly bad person. He was just full of mischief, I guess, and he got involved in a lot of things when he got older and stuff, and he got mixed up with a lot. He had addiction issues and stuff like that, and ultimately all of that killed him, and it is a shame because he was a smart guy. There wasn't a whole lot he couldn't have done, and very athletic, very strong, very very intelligent. But like my grandmother used to say, he was too smart for his own good, and I suppose that's true, really. My grandma had a way of saying things. Our grandma, I mean, his grandma too, but she had a way of putting things sometimes that was perfect. There was one time when she was dying of cancer, and he was there at the house, and there was some commotion involving him anyway. There was some kind of trouble. He kind of brought some trouble to the house anyway. And I remember my grandmother was laying in her bed there, and she wasn't doing very well. And I remember it's a perfect one-liner. She says, oh, she said, he's so crooked, if he swallowed a nail, it'd come out a corkscrew. I remember that. But she did love him, though, and she tried to help him, and, it was just that my grandparents didn't have him enough to really be able to have the kind of effect that they might have had, and like I say, anyway, God rest him. That's all. God rest my cousin Allan. That's all. Anyway, there's another story for you. Kind of ending on a sad note now, but it's kind of a funny story anyway, looking back on it. And typical of the sort of thing my cousin would do. Lots of things like that happened back then. Anyway, that's it for me. It's another story told. Talk later.